Oswin's hand rested on Lady Alara's waist. A public claim, a jagged betrayal against the ancient pact of the moon. Cecilia felt it before she heard the collective gasp of the court. It wasn't a physical blow, but a cold, serrated blade sliding through her soul where the bond once pulsed with warmth. The golden tether that tied her to him simply frayed, snapped. She didn't scream. She didn't weep. Cecilia only turned, her silk skirts whispering like a funeral shroud against the stone floor. She walked toward the heavy oak doors, the weight of a queen abandoned. "Where are you going?" Oswin's voice boomed, sharp with command. But Cecilia didn't look back. By dawn, her chambers were cold, and the king was a man possessed. The castle of Ethelgard was constructed of stone that seemed to drink the moonlight, leaving the halls in perpetual shadow. Cecilia moved through them like a ghost, her footsteps light, purposeful, and utterly devoid of the royal regalia she had worn only hours prior. The crown, a heavy circlet of silver and obsidian, lay discarded on her vanity, abandoned alongside the heavy velvet cloaks of the winter court. She carried only a satchel of cured leathers, a map of the northern wildlands, and the small rusted dagger her mother had gifted her on the day of her union. It was a humble, ugly thing, a stark contrast to the opulence of the king's armory. But it had weight, and in this moment, weight was all that mattered. Her heart did not race. It beat with a slow, agonizing rhythm that reminded her of the tolling bell for a funeral. Every instinct in her body screamed for her to turn back, to run into the great hall and demand an explanation, to claw at the chest of the king she had loved for 300 years. But the bond was gone. The silence in her mind, once filled with the warmth of Oswin's presence, was now a void so vast it felt like drowning. She reached the servants' exit, a small, heavy door hidden behind a tapestry depicting the first hunt. Her hand trembled as she touched the latch. Not from fear, but from the lingering phantom pain of the severed mate bond. Why did he do it? The question flitted through her mind like a moth. But she crushed it. The why was for people who still had a place in the king's favor. She had been his mate, his confidant, his wise queen, as the court whisperers called her. She had steered his hand when his temper flared, whispered logic into his ear when the pack councils threatened to tear the kingdom apart. She had been the gentle hand that kept the Alpha's ruthlessness in check. And tonight, he had tossed that grace aside for the hollow, biting ambition of a younger, sharper beauty. Cecilia stepped out into the night air. The cold was a relief. It bit at her skin, sharpening her focus. Behind her, the castle remained quiet, oblivious to the fact that the glue holding its crumbling alliance together had just walked out the door. Deep within the inner sanctum of the castle, Oswin stood before the great hearth, the firelight catching the gold bands on his fingers. He had dismissed the court, dismissed his guards, and finally, dismissed Alara. The silence in the room was heavy, oppressive. He reached out with his mind, a reflex, a habit built over centuries, to check on Cecilia. He expected to find her in their chambers, likely weeping, likely waiting for his apology. That was the dance they played. He would make a tactical, political choice, one that hurt, one that felt like betrayal, and she would eventually forgive him because she was the anchor of his sanity. But there was nothing. He frowned, the skin around his eyes tightening. He shoved his hand through his hair, his silver-streaked locks falling over his face. He pushed harder, reaching for the golden tether that defined their existence. Cecilia? The silence back was absolute. A cold dread, colder than any northern winter he had ever endured, pooled in his stomach. He turned and strode toward their chambers, his boots hammering against the stone with the force of a battering ram. He slammed the doors open, his breath hitching in his throat. The room was pristine. The bed was made. Her scent, lavender and pine, was fading, replaced by the sterile smell of cold stone and winter wind. "Cecilia," he growled, the alpha tone slipping out, demanding, primitive, empty. He walked to the vanity. He saw the crown. He saw the jewelry he had given her on their centennial. But he did not see her. He picked up a silk glove she had left behind, a garment he had touched only that morning. And for the first time in 300 years, the Vua Gyakon Ngoan felt the terrifying, sharp prick of panic. He had broken the bond. He had assumed she would stay, because she was his. He hadn't realized that for a queen of such noble spirit, even the greatest love could not survive the death of respect. Oswin roared, a sound that shook the very foundation of the castle, and the hunt began before the sun even dared to rise. The morning sun did not bring clarity to the castle of Ethelgard. It brought a suffocating golden light that seemed to mock the darkness in Oswin's heart. He sat upon the throne, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. The council was droning on about border skirmishes and grain tithes. But to Oswin, their voices sounded like the buzzing of flies. Every shift in the air, every rustle of velvet, made his skin crawl. He could still feel the phantom ache where his connection to Cecilia had been severed. A gaping, jagged hole in his consciousness that pulsed with every heartbeat. "Your Majesty?" Oswin blinked, his gaze snapping to the speaker. Lord Valerius, an elder of the pack with eyes as gray as rain. "The northern territories are restless, my king. They whisper that the queen has not been seen at dawn prayer. There are rumors. Rumors are the diseases of bored minds, Valerius," Oswin snapped. His voice was too loud, vibrating through the stone chamber. A few courtiers flinched. Beside him, perched on a slightly lower gilded seat, sat Elara. She was wearing a gown of deep crimson, her hair braided with gold wire. She preened, touching her neck, acting as if the seat were rightfully hers. "Let them whisper," Elara murmured, a sickeningly sweet smile playing on her lips. The queen has always been prone to long meditations. Perhaps she is simply grieving the change in hierarchy. Oswin felt a surge of pure, unadulterated loathing. He stared at Elara, seeing not a beautiful woman, but a shallow distraction, a tactical error he had made in a moment of arrogance. He needed someone who understood the weight of the crown, someone who kept the pack's bloodlust in check. He realized, with a shock that stole his breath, that he had never needed Elara's beauty. He had needed Cecilia's strength. "She is not meditating," Oswin growled. He stood abruptly, the force of his movement sending his heavy goblet crashing to the floor. Red wine spilled across the dais like blood. "My king?" Elara's smile faltered. "The council is dismissed," Oswin commanded, his eyes turning a dangerous, molten gold. He turned to his lead scout, a grizzled man named Kale. "Kale, remain. Everyone else, out. Now." As the room emptied, the air grew heavy. Kyle stepped forward, his head bowed. "The guards are whispering, sire. The queen's scent, it's gone from the halls." "She didn't leave through the gates," Oswin said, pacing the dais like a caged beast. "I would have known. The pack would have felt the shift in the perimeter wards." "She didn't pass the wards, sire," Kyle whispered, his voice trembling. "I checked the logs. No one left by the main roads. But The servants' exit behind the first hunt tapestry was unlatched this morning. Oswin felt the world tilt. He had broken the bond, but he hadn't broken her. He had underestimated her, assuming she was a fixture of his life, like the stone walls themselves. He had forgotten that stone, too, could crumble under enough pressure. "Find her," Oswin ordered, his voice dropping to a low, deadly vibration. "And do not let the pack know she is missing. If they find out the queen has abandoned the king, there will be an insurrection before nightfall. Find her, bring her back, and do not mark her. She is mine to punish." The wind in the northern wildlands didn't just blow. It screamed. It whipped through the gnarled pine trees, tearing at Cecilia's cloak as if trying to rip the secrets from her soul. She hadn't stopped walking since she left the castle. Her feet were blistered, and her lungs burned with the icy air. But for the first time in 300 years, the silence in her mind was glorious. She stopped by a frozen stream, kneeling to splash icy water onto her face. The sensation was sharp, grounding. She pulled the rusted dagger from her belt, the one her mother had pressed into her palm on her wedding day. A queen must have a weapon of her own, her mother had whispered. Not one given to her by her husband. Cecilia had never understood the weight of those words until now. She had spent centuries being an extension of Oswin's will, a buffer between his rage and the pack's loyalty. She had been the Vuagya Kon Ngoan, the wise old ruler whose job was to keep the peace. But peace, she realized, was just another word for suppression. A twig snapped behind her. Cecilia didn't turn. She didn't have to. The survival instincts she had suppressed for centuries, the ones that had been dulled by royal comfort, flared to life instantly. She didn't shift. She didn't possess the predatory strength of the alpha. But she possessed a cunning that was arguably more lethal. "I know you're there," she said, her voice steady. A figure stepped out from the tree line. It wasn't one of Oswin's scouts. It was an old man, cloaked in rags that smelled of earth and dried herbs. He looked like a beggar, but his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and entirely unafraid. "The Queen of Ethelgard, walking in the mud," the old man rasped. "I thought you were a myth, or perhaps a prisoner of your own castle." Cecilia rose, her hand resting on the hilt of the rusted dagger. "I am neither. Who are you?" "I am Silas," the old man said, bowing slightly. "And you, Highness, are Bleeding Scent." Cecilia stiffened. "I masked it with pine." "Not enough," Silas said, stepping closer. He looked at her not with reverence, but with curiosity. "The king's hounds are already on the wind. They can smell the broken bond. It's a beacon, child, a giant golden flare in the dark. If you intend to survive, you need to stop thinking like a queen and start thinking like a wolf. Or better yet, something else." Cecilia's heart hammered against her ribs. She had assumed she would just walk, find a village, and disappear. She hadn't realized that the bond itself was a trail, a literal, sensory path that Oswin could track like a bloodhound. "How do I hide it?" she asked, her voice tight. "You don't hide a bond," Silas said, circling her. "You burn the remnant. But that requires pain. A pain you might not be ready for." "I have been the king's wife for 3 centuries, Cecilia said, her eyes flashing with cold, hard resolve. "I am intimately acquainted with pain. Tell me how." The throne room was a cage of cold stone, and for the first time in 3 centuries, Oswin felt the bars pressing in. He sat on the dais, his fingers drumming a frantic, uneven rhythm against the armrests. The council had been dismissed an hour ago, yet he remained, staring at the empty seat beside him where Cecilia should have been. "You look tired, my king," a voice purred. Oswin didn't turn. He knew the scent of jasmine and sharp, cloying ambition that clung to Alara. She had been hovering like a vulture since the news of Cecilia's disappearance began to circulate, however unofficially, among the inner court. "Do not speak to me of fatigue," Oswin said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He finally turned his head, his golden eyes narrowing. "You were meant to be a distraction, Alara. A political maneuver. You were never meant to be a permanent fixture." Alara's smile tightened, a flicker of genuine malice appearing in her eyes. She smoothed her gown, pacing the length of the dais. A maneuver that has clearly yielded results. The queen is gone, and the pack is waiting for a sign. If you continue to mourn a runaway, you will lose the throne before the next moon. "She is not a runaway," Oswin snapped, rising to his full, imposing height. The air in the room grew charged, static electricity dancing across the tapestries. "She is a fugitive, and if you dare suggest she is anything less than the Queen of Ethelgard, I will have you exiled to the southern marshes." Alara paled, but she did not back down. "The people are asking, Oswin. The grain tithes are late. The border scouts report that the northern tribes are moving. Without the Queen's diplomatic hand, the pack is turning feral. They don't respect me, but they fear you. They need to see a king, not a love-struck boy chasing a ghost in the woods." Oswin felt a surge of violent rage, but beneath it, a cold, hard nod of truth. She was right. He had relied on Cecilia's grace to mask his brutality for so long that he had forgotten how to govern without it. He was the sword, but she had been the scabbard. Without her, he was just a sharp, jagged edge, cutting everything he touched. "Kale!" he bellowed. The lead scout emerged from the shadows near the entrance, looking haggard. "Sire, report. We found the spot where she crossed the river," Kale said, his voice tight. "But the trail ends there. It's as if she simply vanished into the mist." "My men?" "They're starting to complain, sire. They say the woods are cursed. They say the queen is a spirit of the mountains now. Superstitious rot," Oswin hissed, descending the dais. He stopped inches from Kyle, his height looming over the scout. "Search the perimeter again. Do not return until you have a scent. If you have to burn the forest to find her, do it. But bring her back to me." "And if she resists, my king?" Kyle asked, his eyes darting to the floor. Oswin paused. The thought of hurting her made his stomach churn. But the thought of living without the tether, without the constant, soothing knowledge of her presence, was an agony he could not bear. "She will not resist," Oswin said, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "She is my wife. She belongs to the pack. Find her." The northern wildlands were not kind. The wind here was a living thing, biting at exposed skin and howling through the pines like a mourner at a graveside. Cecilia knelt in the frost-covered grass, her hands trembling, while Silas watched her with those disconcertingly sharp, ancient eyes. "To burn the remnant," Silas said, pointing to the silver pendant she had worn for years, a gift from Oswin, enchanted to link their hearts, "is not merely to remove the jewelry. It is to rip the memory of him from your marrow." Cecilia stared at the pendant. It felt heavy, like an anchor dragging her toward the bottom of a dark sea. "I have already left him. I have left the castle. Is that not enough?" "You left the body," Silas corrected. sitting on a moss-covered boulder. But your spirit still reaches for his. Every time you wake, you check for his presence in your mind. Every time you hear a twig snap, you wonder if it is his footfall. You are still his child, because you allow yourself to be. Cecilia felt a flash of irritation. I am trying to survive. I don't have the luxury of philosophy, and that is why you are still being hunted, Silas said calmly. The bond is a psychic wound. As long as it is open, it leaks your location, your state of mind, your very essence. You are a flare in the night to anyone who knows the scent of your soul. To hide, you must cauterize the wound. How? She asked, her voice steadying. You must focus on the coldest memory you have of him. Silas commanded. Not the love, not the 300 years of service. Find the moment your respect died. The moment you realized you were just a tool in his hand. Cecilia closed her eyes. She didn't have to look far. She saw the image of Elara sitting in the chair that belonged to the queen, and the look of indifference on Oswin's face when he saw her leaving. She felt the sharp, jagged cold of that moment. The realization that her centuries of loyalty had been worth less to him than a new, shiny distraction. Hold that cold, Silas whispered, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering on stone. Do not fight it. Do not warm it with your sorrow. Let it freeze the tether. Cecilia drew a sharp breath. She envisioned the golden line stretching from her chest back to the castle, a line that had once been warm and comforting, now appearing as a rotting, parasite-like cord. She visualized her mother's rusted dagger, the only thing that felt truly hers. In her mind, she brought the blade down. A scream tore from her throat, though no sound escaped her lips. Pain, searing and white-hot, flooded her senses. It felt as if her very soul were being torn asunder. She collapsed into the snow, the world spinning in a vortex of black and gray. When she opened her eyes, the air felt different. It was colder, sharper. The constant background hum of Oswin's presence, a hum she hadn't realized was there until it was gone, had vanished. Silence. Absolute terrifying silence. It is done, Silas said, standing above her. You are no longer a queen of Ethelgard. You are merely a woman in the woods. And for the first time in 3 centuries, you are truly alone. Cecilia stood up, her legs shaky. She felt lighter, but also exposed. The danger was no longer a shadow over her shoulder. It was a reality she had to face with her own 2 hands. Now, Silas said, handing her a rough cloak of wolf fur. The real test begins. We move before the sun touches the peaks. The king's scouts are closer than you think. The throne room of Ethelgard had become a tomb of gold and shadow. The tapestries, once vibrant depictions of the pack's history, now seemed to hang like frayed nerves against the cold stone walls. Oswin sat on the dais, but he was no longer sitting like a king. He was hunched, his shoulders drawn inward, his fingers constantly scraping against the velvet of the armrests until the fabric began to tear. The council had stopped meeting in the great hall. Now they whispered in the corridors, their voices sharp and guarded. The grain was rotting in the storehouses because the laborers were too terrified to work, and the border scouts were returning with tales of northern tribes encroaching on Ethelgard's territory, emboldened by the rumors of a fractured court. You are neglecting your duties, Oswin, Elara said, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. She stood at the foot of the dais, no longer bothering to hide the frustration in her posture. The pack is hungry. They are looking at the gates with knives in their eyes. Oswin didn't look at her. He was staring at a map of the northern wildlands, his eyes bloodshot and unblinking. Kale promised a sign, he muttered, more to himself than to her. He said the scouts saw a camp near the Blackwood Pass. Mikhail is a fool, and his men are chasing ghosts. Alara snapped, stepping onto the first riser of the dais. Cecilia is gone. She is likely dead, or worse, joined with the exiles. You are burning your kingdom to the ground for a woman who abandoned you. Oswin's head snapped up. The gold in his eyes flared, a predatory light that made Alara recoil. Do not speak of her as if she were a fallen soldier, he growled, the vibration of his voice rattling the goblets on the nearby table. She is the queen, and if I must burn this kingdom to keep her from finding a new life away from me, I will do it. You are insane, Alara whispered, the realization finally dawning on her. She had thought she was playing a game of thrones, trading up for a crown. But she realized now that she was merely a pawn in a game of obsession. You don't want a partner. You want a possession. I want what is mine, Oswin retorted, standing slowly. The sheer physical presence of him, the raw, ancient power he projected, filled the room. And you, Alara, are becoming tedious. If you mention her name again with such disrespect, I will ensure that your tongue is removed. Alara paled, her eyes wide with sudden terror. She turned and fled the room, the sound of her heels clicking on the stone, echoing like gunshots. Oswin felt nothing as she left. He felt no remorse, no lingering affection. He felt only the singular, burning need to find the woman who had stripped away his anchor, left him drifting in a sea of his own making. He walked to the window, looking out toward the northern peaks. He didn't need the scouts anymore. He didn't need the council. I will find you, Cecilia, he whispered into the frigid air, even if I have to walk every inch of this world myself. The North did not forgive mistakes. Cecilia learned this within the first hour of her lesson with Silas. Your breath is too loud, Silas hissed, batting her shoulder with a gnarled staff. You are not walking in the halls of Ethelgard. The snow here doesn't hush your footsteps, it crunches, and it tells the world exactly where you are. Cecilia grimaced, correcting her stance. She was draped in layers of thick, matted wolf fur that smelled of old musk and smoke, a stark departure from the silks and ermine she had worn for centuries. Her hands, once soft and adorned with rings, were raw and chapped, stained with soil and sap. I am trying, she panted, her voice thin in the biting wind. Trying is for the dead. Silas replied, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. You are hunting, or you are being hunted. There is no middle ground in the wild. Today, we hunt for the evening meal. If we fail, we starve. It was a simple task. But for a woman who had never had to hunt for anything more than political favor, it was impossible. For 3 centuries, she'd lived in a world of abundance, where every meal was prepared by servants and every need anticipated. Here, in the shadow of the jagged mountain peaks, her royal identity was a liability, the rabbit. Silas whispered, pointing to a patch of scrub brush. It knows you are there. It can smell the fear on you. You carry the scent of the castle. You need to wash it away with the sweat of the forest. Cecilia crouched low, her muscles aching. She thought of Oswin, not the king, but the man, the one who used to laugh when they rode through the meadows in the early days, before the crown became a cage. She pushed the memory aside. She needed that cold, hard detachment she had cultivated when she severed the bond. She visualized the rabbit not as a meal, but as a part of the landscape. She slowed her breathing, matching the rhythm of the wind. She stopped being the queen of Ethelgard. She became the snow. She became the pine. The rabbit paused, its nose twitching. Cecilia didn't hesitate. She threw the rusted dagger, not with the grace of a royal, but with the desperate, jagged precision of a survivor. It didn't strike with perfection, but it hit the mark. As the creature fell, a rush of adrenaline flooded her veins. It was the first time she had provided for herself in 300 years. It wasn't just survival. It was liberation. "Good," Silas said, stepping forward to retrieve the catch. He looked at her with something resembling pride. "The scent of the queen is fading. The wolf is waking up." Cecilia looked at her hands, the blood staining her fingertips. She felt a strange, cold joy. She was still being hunted, she knew. She could feel the distant, gnawing pressure of Oswin's search, a psychic storm brewing in the south. But for now, in the silence of the woods, she was free. The northern wildlands were indifferent to royalty. To the mountain, a king was merely a man with a heavy cloak, and to the wolves, a king was merely meat. Oswin learned this not through instruction, but through the biting, relentless reality of frostbite and failure. He had abandoned his guard, his counsel, and his sanity, tracking the faint, lingering shadow of Cecilia's soul through the pass. He was starving, though he didn't feel it. He was freezing, though his rage burned hot enough to melt the snow around his boots. He had become a caricature of the king he once was. His armor tarnished, his cape torn by briars, his golden eyes wild and unseeing. He was no longer leading a pack. He was chasing a memory. "I know you are here," he whispered, his voice cracking. He stood on a jagged ridge overlooking a valley of slate-gray pines. He didn't need to scent her anymore. He could feel the absence of her. That void, the silence where her warmth used to live, acted as a compass. Below, in the valley, Cecilia watched him from the cover of a dense thicket. She saw him stumble, saw him clutch his side, saw the arrogance of the Alpha King replaced by the pathetic flailing of a man who had lost his anchor. She did not feel pity. That was a luxury she had discarded along with her silks. She felt only the cold, hard detachment of the predator. "He is broken," Silas muttered from behind her, his voice barely audible over the wind. But a wounded predator is more dangerous than a healthy one. If you step out, he will try to crush you. If you stay hidden, he will burn this forest until he finds you. "I am not hiding," Cecilia said. She adjusted the strap of her satchel. She gripped the rusted dagger, feeling the handle smooth and cold in her palm. "I am done running." "Then you know what comes next," Silas said, stepping back to let her pass. "You cannot return to what you were. If you step out there, you are choosing a different life. One without a crown. One without a king." Cecilia nodded. She stepped out of the thicket and onto the snow-covered path that led up to the ridge. She didn't walk like a queen. She walked like a survivor. Shoulders square, head held high, eyes fixed on the man who had traded her love for a hollow conquest. As she climbed, Oswin saw her. His breath hitched, a sound that was half sob, half roar. He scrambled down the rocks toward her, his movements clumsy. "Cecilia," he cried, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I found you. Thank the gods I found you." He looked like a man who had been resurrected. But Cecilia only saw the rot beneath the surface. She stopped, waiting for him. She didn't retreat. She didn't flinch. She simply waited for the reckoning. Oswin reached her, gasping for air. He tried to reach out to touch her face, to pull her into the familiar dance of repentance and forgiveness. But Cecilia stepped back, her movement fluid and graceful. His hand grasped at empty air. "Come back," he rasped, his eyes searching hers for the familiar softness, the unconditional support she had offered for centuries. "The pack is falling apart. The council is in revolt. I need you. I need you to fix it." Cecilia looked at him, and for the first time, she saw him not as a king, but as a man who had never learned to stand on his own. "You don't need me, Oswin," she said, her voice calm and steady, cutting through the biting wind. "You need a mirror. You want someone to tell you that you are still the hero of your own story. But I am not that mirror anymore. I made you," he snarled, his rage flaring, the molten gold in his eyes flashing with lethal intensity. "I gave you the crown. I gave you a life of luxury. You were nothing before I bonded you. I was a woman before I was a queen," Cecilia countered, not raising her voice. "And I am a woman now. The bond was a shackle, not a gift. You didn't give me a life. You built a cage and called it a kingdom." Oswin's face contorted. "I love you. You love what I did for you," she corrected. "You love the silence I kept, the peace I brokered, the way I smoothed your edges. You love the tool, Oswin, not the person." He stepped toward her, his posture threatening. The ancient alpha presence flared, trying to dominate her, to force her to heal as she had for 300 years. But Cecilia didn't bow. She didn't submit. She stood in the snow, a figure of absolute, terrifying autonomy. "I am not coming back," she said. "And if you try to force me, you will not find a queen. You will find an enemy. I know every secret of that court. I know every weakness in your rule. I can break you, Oswin, just as easily as you broke our bond." The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Oswin looked at her, searching for the submissive wife he had known. But he found only a stranger, a woman who looked like her, but whose eyes held the cold, ancient wisdom of the wild. He realized, with a crushing weight that brought him to his knees, that she was right. He had chased the ghost of the woman he had discarded, never realizing he had destroyed her with his own hands. "Go back to Ethelgard," Cecilia said, her voice softening, but only with the pity one offers to the dying. "Rule your kingdom, or burn it. It is no longer my concern." She turned, leaving him kneeling in the snow. She didn't look back. She walked toward the mountain pass, toward a horizon that held no throne, no crown, and no king. She walked toward a life that was finally, truly, her own. Oswin watched her go. He reached out, his fingers brushing the snow where she had stood, and for the first time in his long, immortal life, he felt the true, quiet agony of being entirely, irrevocably alone. The tale of Ethelgard and the Vanishing Queen concludes here. But the journey of self-discovery is never truly finished. We witness the fall of a king who refused to see the humanity of his partner, and the rise of a woman who chose survival over servitude. It is a reminder that true power lies not in the authority we command, but in the agency we claim for ourselves. Thank you for walking this path with us. From the cold halls of the castle to the liberating silence of the northern wildlands. If this story of betrayal, transformation, and ultimate freedom resonated with you, please consider hitting the like button, sharing it with a fellow reader, and subscribing for more immersive tales. Until next time, keep writing your own story. Epilogue. The Echo of the Crown. 5 winters have passed since the Queen vanished into the northern wildlands. In Ethelgard, the castle still stands, but it is no longer the terrifying bastion of the Alpha King. The stones, once cold and imposing, seem to have settled into a quiet, weary age. Oswin still sits upon the throne, though the gold is tarnished and the tapestries are dusty. He did not burn the kingdom, as Cecilia had once warned he might. Instead, he simply withered. He became a king of silence. He stopped holding court, stopped issuing edicts, and stopped asserting the iron-fisted control that had defined his rule for centuries. The pack, initially confused and restless, eventually filled the power vacuum themselves. Elders formed councils, merchants rebuilt trade routes, and the fear that had once choked the streets was replaced by a pragmatic, if cautious, peace. Oswin spends his days in the solar, staring out toward the northern horizon. He is a man who learned the hard way that power without partnership is merely isolation. He never remarried. He never sought another mirror. He simply waits, a ghost in his own home, haunted by the crushing, quiet realization that he was the architect of his own exile. Far to the north, beyond the reach of royal decrees and courtly politics, the woman once known as the Queen of Ethelgard lives in a small cabin nestled against the side of a jagged ridge. She is no longer Cecilia the Queen. She is simply Cecilia, a name that means nothing to the world, but everything to her. She has scars now. Thin, white lines on her palms from the rusted dagger and the harsh labor of mountain life. She has lines around her eyes, etched not by worry, but by the laughter she shares with the small community of exiles and survivors she has gathered around her. She didn't lead them as a monarch. She led them as a neighbor. Sometimes, when the wind howls through the pines, she looks toward the south. She doesn't feel the pull of the bond anymore. There is no tether, no phantom echo of a king's demand. There is only the crisp, clean air and the absolute beautiful autonomy of her own breath. She had been a shackle, a tool, and a mirror. But now, she is a foundation. She built a life from the frost and the stone, proving that the greatest kingdom one can ever rule is the one found within one's own soul. The crown of Ethelgard remains, but it is a relic of a dead era. In the wildlands, the true royalty is found in the freedom to wake up and decide, for the first time in an eternity, exactly who you want to be. The castle of Ethelgard was at its zenith. It was the winter of their second year on the throne, a time when the pack still felt the fresh warmth of a new regime, and the air didn't yet taste of stagnant rot. The great hall was filled with the scents of roasted venison, cedar wood, and the sweet, heavy perfume of political favor. Oswin sat on the high dais, his eyes bright with the pride of a young monarch who had successfully unified the warring tribes of the northern basin. Beside him, Cecilia sat, not as a prop, but as a partner. Her hand was on his arm, a steadying influence that the courtiers had learned to respect. The alliance with the Western clan is fragile, Oswin, Cecilia whispered, her voice barely audible over the roaring fire and the clatter of silver. If you force the tribute payments now, they will break. We need them to see us as protectors, not extortionists. Oswin turned to her, his youthful face flushed with wine and victory. He smiled, a genuine, dazzling expression that once made her believe he could be a good king. He squeezed her hand. You worry too much, my love. They are cowards. They fear the bite of the Alpha. If I take more now, they will spend the next 3 years trying to earn back my favor. Fear is a volatile currency. Cecilia countered softly, her brow furrowed. It buys you obedience for a season, but it builds resentment that lasts a lifetime. Let me draft a counterproposal. We offer them trade protections in exchange for a smaller tithe. It creates a debt of gratitude. Oswin's smile didn't fade, but it hardened. The first microscopic tightening of the jaw that Cecilia would one day come to dread. I am the king, Cecilia. The pack respects strength. They do not want a diplomat. They want a wolf who rules. They need a king who knows when to sheath his claws, she insisted, her gaze locking with his. For a moment, the room seemed to go silent. It was a subtle shift in the psychic bond, a tiny, discordant note in their symphony. Oswin stared at her, his golden eyes flickering. He wasn't seeing his wife. He was seeing an obstacle. It was gone in a blink, replaced by his charming, arrogant smile. As you wish, he said, waving a hand dismissively. Draft your proposal. But do not be surprised when they interpret your mercy as weakness. Cecilia felt a shiver run down her spine, one that had nothing to do with the drafty castle stone. She drafted the proposal, and it worked. The Western clan remained loyal, their economy bolstered by the trade pact she had secured. But when the reports of the increased trade prosperity reached the throne, Oswin didn't thank her. He made no mention of the compromise in the court. He simply accepted the tribute, looked at the coin, and told the council that he had convinced the Westerners to fall in line through the threat of military dominance. Cecilia sat in the shadows of the dais, watching him lie to his own people. She felt the first faint fraying of the golden tether. It was barely perceptible, a single strand snapping in the dark. But the silence that followed in her mind was profound. She looked at her hands, soft and adorned with the rings of a queen. And for the first time, she wondered how much of herself she would have to sacrifice to maintain the peace. She thought she was building a kingdom. She didn't realize she was building the very cage that would eventually house her own exile. The air in the high temple was thick with the scent of ozone and ancient mountain herbs. It was the eve of the unification, the moment when the warring tribes were to be stitched together under a single crown. Oswin, barely out of his youth, but already carrying the weight of a dozen battle-hardened years, stood at the center of the ritual circle. His armor was polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the flickering torches that lined the chamber. Cecilia stood opposite him. She was not the stoic, iron-willed queen of later years. She was a princess of a conquered lineage, her eyes guarded, her posture rigid. She had been offered as the political seal of the alliance, the hostage-turned-partner. The bond is a choice, the elder priestess whispered, her voice echoing off the stone vault. It is not merely an enchantment. It is a resonance. Two souls, tuned to the same frequency, becoming the steel and the whetstone of a kingdom. Oswin looked at Cecilia. He was driven by a hunger for peace, yes, but beneath it lay a nascent, terrifying need for control. He saw in her not just a wife, but a reflection. Someone to validate his rule, someone to temper his volatility. He reached out his hand, his fingers trembling slightly. Cecilia stared at his palm. She did not see a savior. She saw a storm she would have to learn to navigate. She placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, the room went white. It was not the gentle warmth of true affection. It was an electric jolt, violent and all-consuming. Oswin felt a sudden, massive expansion of his own ego. The power of the pack, the strength of the mountains, all funneling into him. He felt important. He felt invincible. Cecilia felt the opposite. She felt a pulling sensation, as if her own boundaries were being dissolved. She felt Oswin's ambition, the jagged edges of his arrogance, the deep, hollow pits of his insecurity, rushing into her mind like floodwater. She tried to pull back, but the magic of the rite was already weaving the gold threads of the tether between them. "I will protect you," Oswin whispered, his voice sounding strangely amplified in the chamber. It was a promise, but it felt like a warning. "And I will guide you," Cecilia replied. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the terror she felt. She had seen the future in that fleeting moment of union. A loop of gold and iron, a cycle of dependence that would stifle them both. As the priests chanted the final rites, the golden mark appeared on both their wrists, the sigil of the bound ones. They were no longer two individuals. They were a singular political entity. The crowd cheered, the tribes roared, and the unification was sealed. But in the silence of their own minds, the first discordance was already ringing. Oswin was drunk on the power of the bond, already planning how he would mold his new queen into the perfect mirror. Cecilia, conversely, was already calculating the cost of her own survival. They walked out of the temple together, hand in hand, the golden glow of the bond lighting their way. To the world, it was the dawn of a golden age. To the two people standing at the center of it, it was the start of a beautiful, gilded prison. This prequel provides the foundational irony of their relationship. The bond was never a true love match. It was a political, magical contract that prioritized Oswin's need for validation and Cecilia's need for survival. By showing the white-hot intensity of the forge, we contrast it with the cold, silent severing we saw in the later parts, illustrating the tragic arc of their dependency.